ourselves and not as an imitation of someone else.
Right, I agree. And then when you think in terms of the macho masters, what do you mean by that?
Well, we have an image of these men who gave up everything, sitting on the top of a hill somewhere, pontificating this great wisdom, and being alone and unapproachable in a certain way, sometimes carrying a stick, sometimes breaking the leg or the arm of a disciple. And there are many, many types of teachers. And so, you know, as Buddhism, and particularly as Zen, with all these images, moves into the West, it's really important for us to see human people. And so the stories in this book, particularly of the teachers who taught women, show the kind of balanced personality that these teachers had. And especially when they were teaching women, they had to work a little harder to explain themselves. Then there wasn't just the masculine, laconic approach. They had to explain things more, and it's really interesting to learn about these teachers and a fuller view of their personalities.
And so was that the inspiration for your book, to really just expose the women behind Zen, or what your inspiration?
Well, actually, my reason for the book first started out very selfish in that when I became a priest, I didn't want to be an imitation. I wanted to be myself. I felt like my teacher was himself, and that was the power that he expressed Zen as himself. So I wanted to do that, and so I couldn't find images or role models for myself, so I began studying it. But at some point I realized that this was important for other women too, and so I said, oh, well, I better collect everything that I'm learning about these historical women so that women can benefit and see not only ways that they can inhabit Zen, but how useful Zen meditation is for helping women to come forward.
So the book, it really discusses some of the ancestors, some of the women that kind of led the way. And obviously was a lot of research involved in that. How did you go about gathering your information, and then talk about some of the ancestors?
Well, I did make many trips to Japan where I was studying Zen, and made it my business to find women's temples, because I felt like if I could just go there and feel what it was like, that would be helpful to me. And so I did that, and I also went to scholars' conferences, both in Japan and Korea. And of course I studied a lot, and I met some American women scholars who, in the field of Chinese religions, now are interested as women in the female ancestors. Previously, and this is a way that women's liberation really is helping me, in that these women now were professors, they were educated, they spoke Chinese, and they were able to do the research and bring forth some of these female ancestors.
Wow. Why don't you share some of the, maybe a couple of your favorite ancestors, and tell us about their stories?
Well, my very favorite is the first nun that I discovered as I was interested in looking for women in my tradition, and that is the nun Rengetsu, who studied in both the Pure Land School and the Zen School and the Shingon School in Japan. And she had a very, very difficult life, but all of the difficulties in her life brought her to practicing so she could continue to live and express the Dharma, the teachings. And so the poem that I like that she wrote is about colors of autumn. Clad in black robes, I should have no attractions to the shapes and scents of this world. But how can I keep my vows gazing at today's crimson maple leaves? I saw that today on my way into the studio. The sky was so blue and it was so beautiful. And what she's saying is, I have vows not to be selfish and not to crave beautiful things, but how do I keep my vows while I'm still alive? I don't want to be a phony and suppress all my feelings. So for me that translates, how do I keep my vows and not be too selfish when I see my really cute grandchildren? And how do I keep my vows when I see shoes on sale at Nordstrom's? How do I not be selfish but not turn myself into a person with no feeling?
And how do you live in Western society and get around all of these different things out there that are there to kind of lure you in? One of the biggest problems that I think young women have, or women in general, in Western society is the standard of beauty, you know, and it's just so much, and it's so in your face, you know, that how do women that are not practicing Zen even get around all of this?
Well, it's true that we are victims of the expectations of other people and of our culture unless we have some deeper either religious, spiritual, or philosophical practice. So if you don't have one, you need one. You need to study history and see that women have been consumed with these images of beauty, and they can spend their whole life trying to be attractive to please others because that's what they're told is valued by the culture. But in the end, it's a losing battle because we're all getting older anyway. And so they've spent all this time that they could have spent devoting themselves to study and empowerment and helping other people. They've spent it all in these frivolous ways. And one of the things that I cover in my book is how women in pursuing the practice have at times had to maim themselves or disfigure themselves. We have another example of one of my favorite nuns who was Ryonen Genso, who took a hot iron to her face, and she did that because her teacher honestly told her, I can't admit you, you're too beautiful. All of my monks will be craving you, and it will take their mind off their meditation if you're in the temple. And she couldn't talk him out of that. He said, I know you're sincere, but she couldn't talk him out of that. But when she took an iron to her face, what she was saying to him is, all right, I'm still a woman, but I don't value my being attractive more than I value this practice. And it's very gruesome, but we see it as a historical trend across religions, also in Catholicism, that when some of the young women, when their parents said, no, you can't take vows, we're going to marry you off, they also maimed themselves, cut off their noses or their ears so that their parents couldn't marry them.
And you know, and we're not seeing anything that drastic, you know, like cutting off your nose or burning your face, but today we are seeing young women maiming themselves in other ways. For instance, bulimia, you know, or you know, starving themselves to lose weight, to be beautiful, or going out and having all of these insane surgeries, and then they become so busted that they look deformed, you know, and or the noses are so pointy, or the lips are so puffed up, you know. So it's even though it's different, it's similar.
Well, that's what was so interesting to me as I go back centuries to look at the issues facing women and see how helpful meditating, having a spiritual practice has been to free them from the impediments of their culture, from the lack of freedom they had. I see it very applicable to today's women who are in a certain way imprisoned by the image of beauty, imprisoned by the expectation, and how helpful it is to have some deeper practice, some connection to a source through religion, spirituality, through philosophy, some way of saying, wait a minute, this is like a cartoon. I don't need to play this part.
Right, right. Well, now how is Western society accepting Buddhism? Is it welcoming? What are you finding?
Well, I think that this is in part a responsibility for us too. For example, as a priest in my tradition, formally I have to have a shaved head. But I don't shave my head because I think I have to make the adaptations to make Zen seem like it's not weird. How weird would it be? Or people get concerned when they see me when I do shave my head for ceremonies. They get concerned that I'm having chemotherapy. It means something different in our culture. So how it is we as Buddhist practitioners take on the practice of kindness, patience, giving people attention, rather than making ourselves different or weird. This is a very important part of whether we're going to be welcomed or not.
Exactly, exactly. Do you see Western religions incorporating some of the Buddhist practices?